Lewis, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Going good, man. How's it going?
Doing well. For those who are listening in, this is a UK-based mineral balancing practitioner. So I think most people know by now I'm kind of all in on this mineral balancing thing from all the results that I've gotten. But I think this will be cool too because I get a decent amount of listeners from the UK. So maybe if they've been interested from the other shows, we can plug you at the end and they can reach out to you.
Yeah, I suppose one good thing about hair analysis and mineral balancing it's global. I have more clients outside of the UK than inside, so it's one of the unique, the unique alternative spaces that you can literally work with anyone around the world.
So do you ship products and hair tests mostly all through Europe or what?
Yeah, I mean, when I became a practitioner 6 years ago, I was quite fortunate that Luke, sort of like my business partner, asked me to go on the YouTube channel, so which was our old YouTube channel, and this was like 6, 7, 8 years ago. So YouTube was actually more in its infancy. So we managed to get quite a few subscribers just talking about mineral balancing and hair analysis on that YouTube channel, and obviously I just got clients through people watching on YouTube. So it was just anyone basically around the world that was searching for whatever we were speaking about. So I didn't actually do any sort of marketing, inside England. I sort of spoke to my friends and family about it, but it was mainly my YouTube channel that sort of got most of my clients when I did become a practitioner. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Makes sense. Before we get started, I wanted to ask you, whenever I was researching you and looking through your stuff, it was Lewis Rollins, but then I got a calendar event from Lewis Moon. Do you have a
Mm.
alter ego or something?
No, it's a lot more simple than that. My granddad, my grandparents are called Moon, and I suppose divine intervention or whatever. I sort of haven't spoke to my father for a long time. I was just about to get married. My now wife, was pregnant, and a lot of crazy coincidences happened, and I just knew it was time for me to sort of cut that ancestral tie.
Hmm.
My granddad had two daughters, my mum and my auntie, so I thought it would be nice to sort of carry on his name. So that was basically the switch. It just so
Okay.
happens to sound quite new age and spiritual. The word
I was like,
the word
Moon
moon.
sounds like he's like transforming into something like alter ego for sure. Like it was just a name that you chose. I didn't realize it was actually just going back to your lineage.
Yeah, now it's we can go into it, but sometimes you've got to cut ancestral ties. One of the reasons why people have so many difficulties these days is because you grow up with certain parents, and then parents instill a certain belief system on you. It might be abuse, it might be just the way that you eat, the religious aspects, and some of these are just unhealthy. And unfortunately, my father inhibited a lot of the negative things from his parents, sort of tried to instill that onto us or me. Luckily for my mum, she actually had a divorce, and it just got to a point where I was like, look, if I'm going to bring my kid into this world, I don't want the relationship that I've had with my father. So one of the really important things is cutting sometimes them negative ties that you might have got, and sometimes it is a family member. It doesn't mean that you can't forgive that individual, or you can't move past whatever they've done to you or anything they've said. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to still keep get engaging with them, if that makes sense. So sometimes that needs to happen, and especially needs to happen when people are doing something like the mineral balancing program. It might not be a parent, but usually they've got friends that are very similar to them, that they've often got to cut ties with, and usually it's the cutting of these ties, letting go of certain things, where actually doors start to open, if that makes sense. So it's similar sort of thing, really, with just if you, the higher that you vibrate without sounding too woo woo, at the end of the day, when you start healing yourself properly, you start vibrating at a higher frequency. Your brain starts vibrating at a higher frequency. So in one way, you actually become incompatible with people around you. Relationships they just become incompatible because you end up vibrating at different frequencies. So that's actually what ends up happening on the mineral balancing program, is that most of the time people will actually try and stay with, a toxic partner, a toxic friend, but their vibration will just end up changing so massively that they just become incompatible with that person. If you're not into woo woo or you're not into spirituality, you just have to look at it from the perspective of, once you remove toxins from the brain, the personality, the person's natural personality, which is usually, quite soft, loving. We've all got a loving personality deep down. There's a lot of metals like nickel or arsenic or cadmium that can give people this sense of sort of machoism or narcissism, or sort of a toxic way of thinking. When you actually remove these from the brain, you're no longer feeding into them negative thoughts that these metals can actually produce in people. So so that actually changes who you are as a person. So you actually become incompatible with other people that you used to be compatible with. Usually because the other individuals usually got similar imbalances themselves. It's one of the reasons why you become more compatible with them. A very common one, sort of like, and this has been studied, people that are in prison or incarcerated generally have a higher cadmium level. And cadmium is sort of related to violence. It sort of gives you a sort of like artificial sort of machoism or sort of an artificial anger, but usually they're quite brittle inside. But criminals tend to hang around with criminals, if that makes sense. So when people sort of remove this cadmium, they just no longer feel like they want to be around them particular individuals. So that's like a real life example of, some of the stuff that tends to happen, as you heal yourself, which is fascinating, really.
Yeah, it's crazy you mentioned that right off the gate. I just went through a similar kind of revelation in general, and my last test, I just eliminated some lead, a good amount of nickel, a huge amount of aluminum, and I feel it was awful. I mean, I felt like my brain was blank. Like I was showing up to some of these podcasts, and one of them I didn't even release. I just wasn't doing well, and really just a lot of brain fog, fatigue, parasites. I had like 3 different cold sores, a ear infection. But then I seen the test and all those metals were coming out that I felt like were in my brain. And I just actually messaged Aaron last night and I goes, man, that was a rough patch, but I feel energetically pretty much a lot different. And a lot of the low lingering like depression that wasn't like suicidal or anything, but just like a low mood, like on the regular, kind of just lifted. And from there, almost feel like I do look at certain people almost differently just from that dump alone. It's pretty bizarre.
Yeah, the funny, ironic thing about hair mineral analysis test is the better a hair analysis test looks for a practitioner, the worse someone's usually feeling. I mean, I shouldn't really laugh about it, but if you see a really high nickel, really high copper, really high cadmium, that's gone up from a retest, as a practitioner, you're like, amazing, this is brilliant, this is exactly what we want to see. You got all the stuff coming out. The person at the other end is thinking, I'm about to jump off this ship. And that's actually the biggest. I think it's it probably is the biggest reason why mineral balancing hair analysis hasn't expanded as far as it should do, in my opinion, is because it is so powerful that it actually removes the stuff that's holding people back. A lot of people are in this sort of like mainstream media narrative, this Amazon sort of narrative of like, I should just do something, or this pharmaceutical narrative of I should just take something, or I should just eat something, and I should just automatically feel better. I mean, that's what I was sort of looking for when I was not feeling good back in my teenage years. Is I'm like, just looking for this magic drug. or this magic thing, or this little thing that I might have to switch with my diet, and all of a sudden I'll wake up the next day and feel fine. When in reality, when symptoms start showing themselves, it's usually because the body's extremely good at hiding stuff. I mean, one scientific study showed that your liver can sort of be 2/3 not working, and symptoms wouldn't still present themselves. So when symptoms do actually present themselves in the body, usually the body's been deteriorating for quite a long time, or at least quite a few years. So when them symptoms do arise, in order to unwind them, it's a much more difficult situation. I always remember one thing that I used to say to people is like your health and yourself is a little bit like balancing bricks on a sort of plank of wood, and every brick is a stressor. So it might be cigarette smoking, it might be abuse when you were younger, it might be taking drugs, it might be sort of eating too many carbohydrates, blah blah blah. You stack up all of these bricks, and the body's really good at holding them as much as it can. And then literally you'll just add one last brick on. The common terminology is the straw that broke the camel's back. You add one straw on top of there, and boom, the plank of wood snaps. And then how would you get that plank of wood back together? It's extremely difficult. And that's one of the things that people need to realize. But it's the beauty of mineral balancing. I mean, when I first come across mineral balancing hair analysis, and I'll probably share my story at some point on this podcast. I was feeling really ill for like 6 years, and I knew deep down in my heart, deep down in my soul, I needed something very, very special to get me out of this situation, because I had tried stuff, I've exercised every day and tried this diet, tried that diet. I knew I had to find something seriously special. So when I actually come across the mineral balancing program and saw all of the different things that you had to do, the diet, the lifestyle, the supplements, the detoxification, the ozone, this, that, and the other. There's loads of things. I actually was like, this. If anything's going to get me out of this situation, this is going to be it. I was actually like glad to see so much stuff I had to do, even though it's a bit of a pain in the butt sometimes to actually implement it. And I think that's, for me anyway, it was like that coupled with sort of reading and Dr. Wilson's article on brain fog was like a light bulb moment for me, because I was struggling from brain fog 24/7, and I always sort of it's a weird feeling, brain fog. I'm probably sure you've experienced it before. It's like you're in the car seat, but the windscreen, the car's just not working properly. That's the best way to feel it. So you go to doctors and they're trying to tell you it's a psychological problem. And sort of deep down, like on a mental level, you sort of accept that and sort of maybe go and see a psychiatrist or whatever. But deeper down on a soul level, there's sort of something telling you that you're actually all right. I mean, you're kind of there. You're with it. You're in the driver's seat. It's just something's not. The interface is just not working properly. Do you know what I mean? You can't explain it. And then when I sort of read Dr. Walls' article and saw it's related to copper toxicity, it's related to heavy metal toxicity, it's related to candida, it's related to adrenal fatigue. I saw like 90% of the post was actually talking about physical things, and sort of 10% of the post was talking about a sort of a mental aspect to it. And I was like, this has got to be it. Do you know what I mean? Because I was there in the driving seat, and I just knew there was something else to it. And I read all this stuff, and I was like, brilliant. And sort of started the program, and naively was like, I'll be fine in a week, or I'll be fine in 3 months. Little did I expect the journey I was about to go on, but blessing in disguise.
Yeah, I had similar. I don't know if there was exactly the same path, but I just started having more and more brain fog. Like I literally used to like drink 5 nights a week, and I would make the dean's list like every week, every semester in college, and I would work like 35 hours a week. Like I just literally knew like my brain used to like rapid fire work really effectively, and now I'm 30 years old and I pretty much feel like I have dementia. Like I feel like I have short-term memory loss, like I can't sit down and concentrate. And so I started doing the same thing you kind of talked about. I was so crazy at some point when I had the all everything going on, and I was living in a moldy house here in Florida, which is very common. That was when I was the most bizarre. I was in the doctor's office demanding CAT scans and like MRIs because I was like, maybe I have like a tumor or like cancer. Like that's how crazy I had felt after seeing a few doctors and them just telling me my blood work was fine. And I had a hormone panel from a functional doctor where I had, you could tell I had severe adrenal burnout. Like my cortisol was just flatlined the full 24 hours. And then it actually kind of spiked at nighttime. So I would like be tired all day. And then at night it would be hard to fall asleep. So I knew hormonally something was going on, but everyone else was just, they were just kind of just giving me like surface level stuff and they weren't really getting deep into the toxins. And then I discovered heavy metals and I tried a few different detoxes. And then I went out to Dr. Minkoff, who's like this world renowned doctor for Lyme disease and cancer. Told me I had Lyme and I did this $20,000 Lyme disease treatment, was like out at his office twice a week for like 7 hours a day. I was on like 50 different supplements and I went back and he was doing a lot of muscle testing and advanced testing. And he told me that, you know, after like 6 or 8 weeks, I had beat the Lyme, but I was like, but I literally can't think though. Like I cannot like concentrate on anything. I'm always tired. Like my wife hates me basically, like surprised she's even still with me type of thing. And so finally, you know, I started diving into minerals and then I was into Morley Robbins for a bit and was digging his protocol, trying that out. And then I was like, whatever, Jason Hommel, went into him. I was like, okay, this seems a little bit more extreme, but maybe I'll get somewhere. And I did get some energy from that and also released quite a few parasites on that. And then finally, like I wasn't getting results there, and I heard Clark. I got introduced to Clark's work, heard him on a podcast, and it felt like all of the things I had been researching over the last 5 years, like kind of connected, like the minerals, the metals. This is how you get them out, the parasites. And then I was just like, I think this is it. And then I got introduced to Aaron, realized he was doing similar work to Clark, and we kind of built a relationship. And that's how I got here. But yeah, I mean, how long did it take you to feel pretty good on your mineral balancing protocol?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what you were saying before, I mean, this is this dilemma for most people is that, you know, they'll go to a doctor's office, they'll not feel good. And the doctor, I mean, the amount of times that I've had blood tests and I've gone back to doctors and doctors like, everything's normal. I'm like, well, I don't feel normal. And I think doctors just don't know what to do with that. So their default mode is go and see a psychologist. You know, so people are just in this weird, like, circle, never-ending circle of, like, going to doctors, everything's fine, and then going to a psychologist, and the psychologist sort of giving them drugs or giving them whatever, saying this, and, you know, the doctors and the psychologists aren't just talking to each other. So then obviously people go off on their own and try and find alternative methods. But one thing that's really weird to me is when people just focus on one thing, you know, like Lyme, for example. You know, it's like, why would you just focus on one thing? It just doesn't make any sense. Similar to sort of like Jason Hommel to a degree. So, you know, at the end of the day, that's why mineral balancing to most people, when you come across it, it's literally like, you know, the heavens have just shone on you because every single thing is catered for. Like, you'll probably ask Aaron a question. You can ask me a question. What about this? What about this? What about... They've always got an answer. The real good practitioners, like, you know, Clark's one of them. Aaron's, you know, excellent. Susan's very, you know, excellent. The really good ones will always give you a good answer that makes sense. You know, like, it's when I was sort of like building software that we can talk about later on. You know, I was like looking at the practitioners thinking, oh, are they onto something and I'm not? Then you go and ask them a question and they don't have a proper response at all. And that's how you, in my opinion, that's how you sort of figure out the good practitioners from the bad ones. Is like asking a practitioner something and getting a response that not only is sort of scientifical, but it just logically makes sense. So it's like, oh, that just makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like when I was reading Dr. Wilson's articles, it's like it just made sense. It's like, well, yeah, it makes sense. Like, don't do too much exercise because it's going to burn your adrenals out. Like, that's just When something, I mean, you obviously don't think that because, you know, mainstream and Western media sort of say if you're not feeling good, you know, go and do a lot of exercise, you know, or whatever. But you read Dr. Wilson stuff, you're like, well, that just actually like makes sense. You know, same with the vegan argument. It's like, well, you know, sorry about that. You get like someone saying, oh, you know, well, we've been omnivores for 100,000 years, 200,000 years. It's like, yeah, I mean, we're omnivores. Like, I don't understand where the argument is, you know. So I just wanted to sort of swing back on that you were saying. But yeah, I mean, my story's quite a complex one, I guess. I mean, I sort of grew up as a normal household to a degree. I did have some problems with my father. I'm not going to go into because just old energy. But sort of like I got brought up similar to how my mum probably got brought up. I got brought up on sort of candy, you know, carbohydrates. I'm not saying my mum was a bad parent, like not in the slightest, like literally the best parent I could have wished for. But it sort of brought us up on, you know, chicken nuggets and fries and pizza and, you know, just things that was quick to make. You know, she was like a hardworking mum. You can't blame her for that. And then I sort of like was I was a high achiever at school, and I think that served me well now. But I didn't think it necessarily served me very well when I was younger. So I was always sort of put on this pedestal, a sort of high achiever. So I always had to make sure that I was like the best at, you know, you call it soccer over there. I was really a sort of high level football player. You know, athletics, you know, maths, art, all this sort of stuff. So I always had to like overachieve, which gave me this mindset. We call it now sympathetic dominance of a chronic state of fight or flight, where you're constantly on the go. My mum was also the type of person, she still is now. She can't relax. And we got instilled into us when we was younger, don't laze around, don't lie on the sofa, you know, get up. You know, it's a weekend, you know, get up, let's get going sort of thing. And we were always doing loads of things, and, you know, our days were completely full. So when I was 16, I started taking sort of some recreational drugs. You know, most kids are into it, sort of smoking weed, this sort of stuff. So my mum was like, right, you need to go and find a job. So I was 16, you know, so I'll go and find a job. So I ended up sort of working in this restaurant, sort of like a 5-star restaurant. And it was a massive shock to reality, if I'm being completely honest, because I was really used to being put on this pedestal of like high achiever and all this sort of stuff, and all of a sudden I was like at the bottom of the pecking order, working as a waiter, and my natural response was, I'll just work harder than anyone else, you know. And I gained respect through that because, you know, people saw that I was actually good at what I was doing. But over time, now I realise what happened is I started to burn out basically. I'd started smoking weed. I think the first time I actually got this detachment from reality, you know, brain fog and derealization and depersonalization are very intertwined. I was definitely, you know, we call it DPDR, derealization, depersonalization. That's what I had basically. And I think I first got it from smoking. I remember like sat in the kitchen of someone who I was working with at this restaurant, smoking weed, and then all of a sudden I just got this detachment, and it never fully come back. My reality never come back from that point. And I've actually had quite a few people get in touch with me that it was a spliff that actually, or smoking marijuana that actually started them on this detachment situation. I think a lot of it's to do with overwhelming the liver, similar to what I said before, where the liver sort of like can handle itself pretty well, and then you just get the straw that breaks the camel's back. I'm not divert too much, but that's generally the cause is sort of the liver just says I'm overwhelmed, and then the body goes into this burnout mineral stage that you probably will get to know on the hair mineral analysis test. So all of a sudden, I'm 16. I'm a high achiever, and I've got this chronic derealization and depersonalization and brain fog. I didn't want to tell my mom. I didn't really know what was happening myself, so I was like, in a way, ashamed of saying there was something wrong when I had such a good life. So I had this shame that I didn't really want to say anything. I didn't really know what was going off myself. I was always used to solving problems by myself anyway, do you know what I mean? Because of this persona that I'd managed to build up for myself. So one of the things that I used to do to try and get out of it, you know, Western media sort of say, well, if you're not feeling good, go and exercise. So that's what I did. I used to play a lot of football. I used to do parkour, free running. I used to love doing that. So I just used to exercise and exercise and exercise. And I used to go out on like 7 mile runs, come back, and I might get like a 5 or 10 minute break from the brain fog. Now I know that's because I'd forced my adrenal glands so hard to release a little bit of hormones that it temporarily made me feel better. So I thought, well, the more I exercise, if I can just increase that level, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, feeling better, it's surely, logically, it's just going to get longer and longer, the feelings of normality. In reality, obviously, that didn't happen. I was just burning my body out even more. I was taking drugs as a way to cope. So I would go out regularly and take MDMA and cocaine, you know, ketamine. Mate, recreationally, it wasn't like I was like a drug addict or anything like that. I used to sort of smoke socially. And one interesting thing that used to happen when I used to smoke is that I used to temporarily get a relief from brain fog after having a cigarette. Usually it was the first one or two. And I actually found out by Dr. Wilson further down that cadmium, which is very high in tobacco, actually shunts copper from the blood or shunts into tissues. So if you're suffering from copper toxicity detachment, cadmium temporarily sort of grabs onto copper and you get this temporary relief from, you know, derealization. So, and anyway, kept on going. I went to university, you know, did all the stuff. And then I think one of the things that really put the nail in the coffin was when I took Accutane. You might have heard about it. It's an acne drug. Really, really
Heard horrible things.
Yeah, really horrendous drug. I sort of took that. I was still just living the life that I did live, so I was drinking and stuff. Didn't realize what that was doing to my liver. Now I realize that just made the whole situation 100 times worse. So, you know, we're getting on now. We're at 2021. This is going on for a while. Probably started really 14, 15. So we're talking 5, 6 years now of like chronic derealization. It got to a point where, you know, social anxiety was horrendous. I had 40, 50 symptoms, you know, heart palpitations, you know, extremely horrendous skin. You know, you name it, I probably had it. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I was like on the internet, saw this word brain fog getting thrown around quite a bit. I was like, well, if I've got anything, I've got brain fog. Do you know what I mean? So I was just researching brain fog, and you know, this was back in the time where, you know, Google wasn't punishing people that actually had good information. So Dr. Wilson was at the top of the Google for like brain fog and sonotherapy and stuff like that. So I luckily just landed on his article. Fortunately for me, I wasn't offended by his website. Most people are because it's just like, you know, it looks like it's just like basically a book on the internet. For me, it was like finding this treasure trove. For me personally, it was like opening an old book or something that I'd found in an old library. So I read it and I was like, that is me. And that basically started my obsession with mineral balancing. I was obsessed with actually getting better. You know, I was constantly reading. So anyway, I started the program, and I instantly actually got relief, which was amazing. I actually instantly got relief from brain fog that I'd never had in 6 years. So that was a very overwhelming moment for me. It was mainly when I cut down the sugars and carbohydrates and did a coffee enema. You know, I had crazy stuff happens to me. Like, you know, I used to eat, the first time I had a can of sardines, literally felt like someone had opened my skull and just poured water over it. That's how malnourished I was. I did a coffee enema for the first time, and it was as if, you know, Jesus himself had just put his hands on my shoulders. I was like, what is that? You know, it was just absolutely insane. And I think because I had such a good response to the program early on, I just assumed that I would be fine in like 2 months, 3 months, or whatever. So it took me a few months for me to actually realise the horrendous state that I'd managed to get myself into. It's actually like when you remove stimulants and you remove, the things that you used to feed off. For me, it was like exercise and carbohydrates and sugars, cigarettes, alcohol. So it's when I removed that and I was in fight or flight, so I was in sympathetic dominance, which is like artificial energy. Your body's in a fight or flight state. So it's actually when I turned that off and removed all the stimulants, I actually felt the true fatigue of my adrenal glands. And I've got to say, it was the most horrendous feeling that I've ever had. Now, luckily for me, I was reading up on stuff, because most people would have run a mile from the program and said, "This is not working. I'm feeling 100 times worse." Because basically, I was technically got worse. Do you know what I mean? I lost like a lot of weight. My fatigue I never felt fatigue like it. Literally woke up every day and it was as if I'd been hit by a steam train. It was just absolutely absurd. My parents had obviously looking at me, more tired and more fatigued. They was just telling me whatever I'm doing's incorrect. Luckily for me, I was doing the reading. I read Dr. Wilson's article on adrenal burnout, and he says in there, if you remove the stimulants, if you remove the scaffolding that's holding your body up, then naturally you're going to feel the inner fatigue. So I knew that on a psychological basis, on a mental basis, but I didn't realize how long it was going to take me to heal. So I'm in like last year at university now, and I thought to myself, there's absolutely no way I can finish university and go and live back at home with my parents, because they're going to expect me to be going to work. There's no way on earth I can do a full-time job. This is like 6, 7, 8 months into the program. So anyway, one of my friends, God bless him, who passed away recently, of a brain tumor, crazy. He was like, "Look, I'm going away traveling. Do you want to come with me?" And I was like, this is an opportunity for me to just get away. Now, this is when things start getting weird. So I was a complete atheist. Like I was dead into, science, the Big Bang, God's not real, any of this, whatever. I started doing the program, and like 3 days, I didn't have much money to go to Thailand. Maybe I had like £1,500, which is like $2,000, like nothing to go traveling. And like 2 days before going away, an insurance claim that had been going on for years and years and years, I'd forgotten about. I was in an accident, not a big accident. This insurance claim just come through randomly. And I was like, man, what are the chances of that? Crazy. What are just a crazy synchronicity of me receiving this money to go away. Do you know what I mean? You could call that a synchronicity, but after a while it becomes truth with all the crazy stuff that happens to you. So anyway, I went to Thailand. I was doing the program, and we was in, I don't know if you've been to Thailand, but it was in a place called Pai in Thailand. It's like little hippie village. Super, super cool. And I was like, right, I need to find some supplements, because, I've got the diet, the Enemas or whatever. I need to go and find some supplements. So anyway, went to Dr. Wilson's website, searched for practitioners, found out that there was a guy in Chiang Mai who sold the Endomet supplements called Robert Morgan. He also passed away actually a few years ago in an accident, a motorcycle accident. He was an amazing guy, absolutely phenomenal guy. So I ended up like getting a scooter from Pai to Chiang Mai, which is like 70 miles or something. Gets to Chiang Mai, and this guy is like Jesus. Honestly, he's the most energetic 70. I don't know how old he was. 70, early 70s, late 60s. I've never seen energy like it in my life. Never. Unbelievable energy, just completely glowing. This guy, like, such a nice person. And I started talking to him about the program, and he basically said, "Look, I'm building a retreat for hair analysis and mineral balancing. Why don't you come and live with me on the retreat?" And I was like, if anything's gonna get me out of the situation that I'm in, this opportunity is gonna get me out of that situation. So I basically ended up like leaving my friend. He went off traveling by himself, and I went basically to live with Robert. on this retreat, and I helped build the retreat. And it was in that year where, it was just a crazy, crazy year where I sort of realized I had EMF sensitivity. So I had to build a Faraday cage for myself and live in a Faraday cage. I had to basically live off of like just leafy greens at one point because I was so sensitive to carbohydrates that even carrots was problematic for me. So I went through this process, and then all of a sudden I released copper. Now, for anyone that's ever released copper before in a large amount, you cannot explain how it feels until you actually go through it. It was the most traumatic event I've ever experienced in my whole life. And sorry, one of the things that I want to do as a practitioner is to try to help people, understand what happens when you release copper, but also give people the tools to deal with it. Because one of the problems that Robert had is he'd already been on such a big journey that he never experienced any healing reactions before. So he never actually experienced a copper dump himself. So he didn't actually know the process of dealing with it. So I had to kind of do it on my own and figure out, how to deal with this. And in the end, I got over it. It took about 3 or 4 months. I was so traumatized by the end of it. I ended up leaving Thailand and going back home to England. But luckily for me, I was like 1.5, 2 years into the program, and we call it the 2-year hump, whereby the first 2 years is generally the time which is the most problematic for people. You're releasing the most toxins, and I felt like I managed to get over this 2-year hump. So I sort of lived with my parents for a couple of years. So it was probably by the 5th year, I was feeling fairly okay, if I'm being completely honest. It probably wasn't until the 7th year where I was like, this is permanent, By the 5th year, I could relapse, sort of thing. But by the 7th year is when I realized it was complete permanence. Now, for a lot of people watching this, that might be a scary thing that I've just, a scary number, 7 years. But you got to realize when you're feeling that crap and, you start the program and you feel these improvements, that's like being cured for some people. If you know what I mean, like I was so grateful that I felt some change that it was much easier to sort of get through things. So a general rule, if I'm being completely honest, is, and this is a very, very general rule, but generally the amount of time someone's been feeling really bad is generally the amount of time it kind of takes to get to like permanent healing. But yeah, I mean, that's basically, I know I've gone on for quite a bit, but that is the story. That is, compressed. I could go way more in depth with all the crazy stuff that happened, but yeah, I mean, I sort of like had crazy healing reactions where I sort of saw angels and had chakras opening. Yeah, I had some like mad stuff, like encounters with God and just crazy stuff, which I end up coming out of it being a complete, Christian, sort of Judeo-Christian mindset.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I'm glad you told it because I had heard you kind of explain it on one of the YouTube videos, and I was like, the crazy synchronicities of the money coming through, and then finding the guy in Thailand who was super energetic, and then it was like, why don't you just come live with me? Like, no better place to be, really, when you're trying to do those first couple of years. Most people are working a job, got 2 kids or whatever. You were just able to just kind of hang out and work with a guy who's been doing the program forever. So I don't know. That's definitely, it was super cool. It's just, I love when I hear like super, I get woo woo on this show. I talk about psychedelics and yoga and meditation and all kinds of things. So I don't think it'll scare anybody off who's been listening for a while for sure to talk about the synchronicities. And you kind of got into your copper reactions, which is the core base of the show because, I kind of found you actually when I was researching Susan, I didn't realize how many like videos you guys had together. And then I started watching some of your other videos, and I was like, you know what? I was like, if anybody's going to come on here and talk about copper, who's been through it, I definitely want to have Lewis on to do the copper toxicity show, because I'd still have people reach out to me about the high copper protocol, because they'll listen to that show, but then they'll start seeing other mineral shows on my show, and they'll be confused. And I'll have to tell them, hey, I did that protocol for a while, and then now I'm doing the HTMA thing. So you'll see the progression over time throughout the year of me. I was on that protocol and now I'm not. I now believe in copper toxicity. Not to say that copper isn't super important as well, but there is definitely a lot of nuance that goes into copper. Besides, everybody just needs infinite amounts of copper for unlimited amounts of periods. Because I guess I can just give my experience with it before I ask you some questions. Is, I was on that high copper protocol, and then when I got my first HTMA, I was on only zinc for I think about 4.5 months, 5 months, something like that. The first while I only needed zinc, and then I was doing obviously the Limcomin or the NAK up, which is a copper and zinc as well. So it's like a balanced form of the zinc to copper ratio. And then now I'm back on just zinc. So there is definitely time periods where you're going to utilize that copper, and then time periods where you're not along your program. And then I'm sure you settle into one side or the other over time usually. But that's the reason we get the test. But I guess, what are some of the benefits of copper? I guess let's start there. Like, why do we use copper? Why is copper getting a lot of headway, making a lot of noise within Morley Robbins and Jason Hommel and stuff? I want to kind of start there, because I think people, when you're talking about copper toxicity or bio-unavailable copper, think that we're only going to demonize copper, but really it's very beneficial. So why don't we go through some of the benefits of copper first?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy, like from a mineral balancing perspective, is just to demonize copper, like you said, and talk about copper toxicity, etc., etc. It takes a while for people to actually realize how beneficial copper is. Sometimes it's better to understand the benefits of copper by talking about the things that copper actually can do to you when it's not bioavailable in the body. So people get like joint pain. Copper has a lot to do with sort of ligament formation. It has a lot to do with sort of collagen and skin health. So people have got like, dry skin, acne, spots, usually have some sort of copper dysregulation. Copper has a lot to do with emotional calmness, and feeling calm and feeling grounded and feeling sort of happy. It's got like a very sort of feminine, higher vibrational sort of mineral. So when it's bioavailable, you feel very calm, very grounded, a bit spiritual in a sort of grounded way. It's not like you can get like copper toxicity spirituality where you're just sort of spaced out. But when it's bioavailable, you feel it's a really nice feeling, really calm feeling. And then, some of the things that copper does when it's not bioavailable is kind of the opposite to that. So you feel anxious, you feel fearful, you feel ungrounded. So sometimes talking about the opposite, what copper toxicity causes, gives you a bit of an idea. I mean, one of the things that copper does in the body is it regulates candida. So when copper is not available in the body, you sort of get candida overgrowth. So that's one of the things, sort of a side effect of not having bioavailable copper, is sort of candida overgrowth, which causes like a drunken feeling, brain fog feeling, forgetfulness. So, when copper actually is bioavailable, it comes out of the tissues, you'll generally find that people get a really strong candida or fungal die-off because of copper's power on, killing fungi and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, very, very much related to skin, very, very much related to female reproductive system. So anyone that's suffering from lots of like bad PMS, I mean, one of the things that people know and are very aware of is how many women feel when they're going through the cycle. What's the general thing that you hear about? Oh, my partner's goes crazy. She gets sort of mood swings. She gets really anxious. She struggles to sleep. That's all due to high copper levels in the body, because copper is very much related to female, reproductive health. And an interesting thing that the body does in that is it sort of like craves copper. So when you've got really high copper in the cycle, the body will naturally crave copper. What food is probably the highest in copper? Chocolate. So it's these, it's something that's actually ingrained into our societies. Like, oh, just go, my partner all the time asks me to go and buy bars of chocolate when she's going through the cycle. And I know it's because of the craving for copper is so extreme. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, those are some of the benefits. I could go on and on and on, really.
It's super funny that you mentioned the chocolate is I've literally used to want chocolate all the time. Like we'd be in the grocery store and let's get a chocolate bar for dessert or ice cream or both. And one of the things I've noticed as I've balanced out over these last like 9 months is I almost rarely ever even have cravings for the chocolate or for the ice cream. It's actually kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's weird that when people got a high copper, the body actually craves it. It's similar to sort of if the body's functions on carbohydrates and sugars, it craves carbohydrates and sugars because it's the only way that the body knows how to sort of deal with energy and stuff. Like a woman who's going through a cycle, if copper's really high and the body's using it up for other things like it needs to in women's reproductive health, there's sort of a shortage of copper, so the body naturally wants to crave more of it. Um, but in reality, it's not that women necessarily have a shortage of copper, it's that copper becomes bio-unavailable, aka copper toxicity, which is probably something we should probably talk about the mechanics of, because I think that's what most people are confused about is, what is copper toxicity? Where does it come from? Why do people take copper? Why do we need to take copper when we're copper toxic? So that's what people stumble on the most. So I mean, if you want, we could sort of delve into that.
Yeah, go into it.
Give people,
Those are all some of my questions anyways.
yeah, give people sort of the breakdown of the process of what we talk about and what even Jason Hommel talks about. Other people talk about is like how copper is utilized. So the general thing that generally happens is that people become stressed. It doesn't really matter what type of stress it is. It could be any type of stress, financial stress, dietary stress, work stress, relationship stress, exercise stress. So people get stressed. And the body has a natural response to stress, which is to, try and to turn on the fight or flight system. It uses up buffering minerals like calcium, magnesium, zinc. These are our body's, buffering and sort of healing minerals to a sense, but mainly the buffering minerals. One of the biggest ones, zinc. The zinc's a big factor in this. So the body gets stressed. But the problem is these days is people's bodies get too stressed. So they become chronically stressed, usually from all of the different symptoms, all the different things that people are accustomed to doing in the Western world. So, we're always busy, we're always eating rubbish, we're always out, maybe drinking, partying, smoking. Now vaping's a big thing for people. So what generally happens is the body goes through a process of it goes into sort of a stress response, and when that stress response is not dealt with, the body will go into sort of what's called an alarm reaction or a secondary alarm reaction, where the body's in this perpetual state of chronic stress. So what's happening in that situation? Well, you're burning up calcium, you're burning up magnesium, you're burning up zinc, your adrenal glands are being overworked, your liver's becoming overworked. When you're in a state of fight or flight, your detox pathways shut down because the body's trying to keep itself, the body's focusing all of its efforts into just dealing with this stress. So your detox pathways shut down. So you start to accumulate toxins, and it's similar to what we was talking about in the beginning with this, the straw that breaks the camel's back. At some point, and generally on a hair mineral analysis test, if you want to go for it from this perspective, generally people are in fast oxidation at this point. Most adults are usually should probably be in. So we should talk about what's a healthy hair analysis. So generally, a healthy hair analysis is an adult that's in sort of mild slow oxidation. Mild slow oxidation is good because it means if you get a stress, you can jump into fast and then pop back into slow. Your copper level's pretty good. You're showing no signs of like heavy metal toxicity. You've got no major patterns like like a follow pattern or a ball pattern, so that's sort of like healthy adult. You generally don't really see many healthy adult tests until you're like seeing tests 5, 6, 7 years down the line. But that's how it should be. So generally, what happens is that you're in this perpetual stress. So the body sort of goes into a secondary alarm reaction, which is sort of fast oxidation. So the oxidation rate tends to speed up. It's similar to metabolism. It basically means how quickly the body is burning energy. Food energy is oxidation rate. So you go into fast oxidation, which is a secondary alarm state. So when you're in fast oxidation, this is a chronic fight or flight response. You're always in fight or flight. So you're burning up all these minerals. Your adrenal glands getting weaker. Your liver's be getting weaker. Your kidneys are under a lot of stress. That's a big factor with people who are in fast oxidation. Anyway, you get the straw that breaks the camel's back. It could be a bereavement. It could be just a big night out. It could be smoking a spliff, whatever. Sometimes psychedelics do it. Just breaks the camel's back. Boom. Now we're in burnout stage. And you look at hair analysis test, it's showing slow oxidation. Remember, mild slow oxidation is not too bad, considering looking at all of the rest of the test. Now you're in slow oxidation. You're in maybe you're in a follow pattern, which is a much more bigger derangement of the body. You might be in sort of a fight or flight pattern called sympathetic dominance, where you're really overthinking too much. That's when the potassium level is like 4 or below. So you've gone into burnout. You've started off normal, you've gone into a secondary alarm reaction, and now you're in burnout. So what's happening in this sort of stage? Well, the body's still burning up zinc. It's trying to survive. It's trying to keep on going. And the detox pathways are shutting down even further. So you're getting more of an accumulation of toxins. The adrenal gland is becoming more and more stressed out, even though the person might not be fully aware of it because they're taking so many stimulants to keep them going. And, you start getting a lot of other different symptoms: your social anxiety, your fear, your brain fog, your detachment from reality. Which I don't want to forget that. I might just say it quickly now. One of the body's ways of surviving when it's going through, depression is a good example. The body will actually make the brain depressed, or the body will make a person depressed on purpose to try to stop them from doing whatever they're doing. Do you know what I mean? So that's actually a survival mechanism. Raising the copper level in the brain is actually another survival mechanism that will detach a person from reality. It's a survival mechanism to detach a person from reality, and the body's hoping that the person's going to stop doing whatever it's doing that's causing massive amounts of stress. So all this detachment and depression is actually the body doing it in a way on purpose. Obviously, you need minerals to feel happy, etc., etc. But it's doing it on purpose to a degree. I don't want to say 100% of the time, in order to try and stop a person from doing whatever they're doing. Right. So in terms of like copper, one of the things that people need to realize is that the adrenal glands play a massive role in helping the body metabolize copper. So the adrenal glands basically send signals to the liver to create copper-binding proteins. The main one's ceruloplasmin. There's other ones like methionine. The main one's ceruloplasmin. And ceruloplasmin is a copper-binding protein. It's an amazing protein that binds to copper. So it finds copper, grabs it, and basically allows copper to be utilized around the body. Right? So when the liver isn't producing a lot of ceruloplasmin and other copper-binding proteins, a lot of the reasons because the adrenal glands are not really sending it signals, then what happens is you get a buildup of copper in the liver, buildup of, and and then that sort of like spreads. So then you get a buildup of copper in the kidneys, in the brain, and it's just because the body hasn't got the copper binding proteins. All right, so you got to think this is what we call basically copper toxicity. So when sorry about that, give over, Bella. When people say the way to solve copper toxicity is just by taking zinc, it's not actually the big picture. Obviously, zinc's really important to sort of nourish the adrenal glands. Copper and zinc kind of work together. Well, they like yin and yang. So generally, when you've got high copper in the body, you've got low zinc, and sort of vice versa. So they do work together in a sort of a symbiosis like that. But Bella, sorry about that.
Okay.
So like a symbiosis like that. But the zinc's not the only sort of player in the game. So this is what happens when people talk about copper toxicity. So then the question is, well, why does people like Jason Hommel, Morley Robbins, whatever, give people copper? Well, the thing is, like we talked about before, why is copper really beneficial? Beneficial. It is really beneficial, but you've got to think at the moment now the body is sort of like building up copper and it's not using it properly. So if you was to give a person copper in an available form that they can take and digest and, obviously ingest into the system, they'll generally feel better because the body has some available copper. Now, the big problem is you get black and white. I'm copper toxic. Oh my God, I need to reduce copper foods. I need to take more zinc. You get one side of the coin. You get the other side of the coin, which is I'm copper deficient. I need to take copper. I just need to take as much copper as I possibly can. What we're saying in hair analysis is that you've got to look at things symbiotically. So on a hair analysis test, there's a few factors involved where we can figure out how people need to deal with copper. So if you're in slow oxidation, you generally got copper toxicity, and if you're in extreme slow oxidation, you've generally got copper toxicity. There are other indicators that you look at on hair analysis that can give you an idea of how severe the copper toxicity is. So a 4-low pattern would be an indicator. Sort of like a low phosphorus level would be an indicator. A low zinc level would be an indicator. A sort of a low NAK ratio would be an indicator. So you can see all these indicators on a hair analysis test to see how severe an individual is suffering from copper toxicity. But you can also see on a hair analysis test whether someone is in need of copper at that moment in time, sort of available in the blood. And generally you see that on hair analysis by looking at the sodium to potassium ratio. It's called the NAK ratio. So when the NAK ratio is low, even though you're showing copper toxicity indicators, if you're in slow oxidation, if you've got a low NAK, which is called the vitality ratio, it's actually called the life or death ratio. It's that important. Doesn't mean you're going to die, but it's so important they do call it the life and death ratio. If you've got a low NAK ratio, then it's a good idea. Well, in a way, it's essential to take a little bit of copper. Now, when you've got a low NAK ratio, usually, most of the time, people feeling really bad. It's a sign of poor health. So I would say, 80, maybe even 90% of the time, people have got a low NAK ratio, but they're also in sort of like slow oxidation. They've got copper toxicity indicators. So this is where the confusion lies. It's like, yes, you've got copper toxicity that we need to bring out of tissues into the body, into the blood, but you also need to take copper at that particular time. Some people do actually show genuine signs of copper deficiency, which are generally fast oxidizers who show, are more copper deficient. So someone like Jason, when you're doing it for a long time, you can tend to pick up on what people are in. He's probably a fast oxidizer. So copper for him is like nectar. Feels amazing when you take copper in your fast oxidizer. If you fast oxidizer with a low NAK ratio, that is. So the thing that what I want to try and put across as a mineral balancing practitioner is that it's not black and white. It's this combination of, you are copper toxic, but you do need copper at the same time, and getting that balance, and also trying to like say to people that it's not copper is not just the main player involved with all this stuff. I mean, when you got copper toxicity, you've also got to look at your lifestyle, which is generally bad. You've got to look at other metals that will usually be toxic in, especially like mercury and lead and arsenic and stuff. Usually people quite malnourished. So you've got to get the right combination right. If you did like a vegan diet or something like that, you're going to make the problem way worse.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that kind of adrenal component because when you're studying Morley, I listened to like 1,000,001 podcasts of him. Played his audiobook a couple times, two, three times, just trying to get a grasp because he is very smart and he's very well researched, but I just don't think he understands the total nuance of everything because their camp kind of feels like you can just like do adrenal cocktails two, three times a day for your sodium, potassium, and then take copper. Basically all you need is some amount of copper. Morley's more conservative, 2-4 milligrams, retinol from cod liver oil, and then whole food vitamin C for the tyrosine, and that's going to activate your ceruloplasmin, and that's going to get your copper more bioavailable and utilize it better. But like the HTMA practitioners, like, oh, it's a little bit deeper than that. Maybe you don't need copper depending on your oxidation rate or your metabolism, whatever you want to call it, and maybe you do. And then also the adrenals are playing a role because they're sending the signal to kind of even activate the ceruloplasm as is. So it's not just this whole food vitamin C component. There's more going on. If you're an adrenal burnout, adrenal cocktail is not really going to do too much, in my opinion. It's just orange juice with a little sodium and potassium in it. I don't think that's a magical elixir there. I think there's a lot more going on at the biochemistry level that really is going to take someone out of the adrenal burnout in general. So I'm super glad you touched on that for sure. And then I know zinc is a component, and it seems like it's like when you talk to Clark, for instance, he'll say zinc's the number one deficiency. Do you think that's like because of like how we've demonized red meat in the diet, or is it the fact that the stress of the system, the heavy metals, the lifestyle depletes zinc at such a rapid rate? What's going on with the zinc connection?
I think it's a bit of both, really. I mean, the thing is with zinc is that whenever the body's stressed, the body's going to, burn up zinc, basically. So, most people today are extremely stressed. So you got to couple that with the fact that we're getting poorer quality foods. People are not just eating red meat. They're not really eating much good quality white meat. And it's about sort of having like a bit sort of whole foods in a sense when it comes to eating meat. So it's not just having like really lean meat. Do you know what I mean? Like chicken thighs are good because you get the ligaments, you get the skin. You get a lot of components of like the food as a whole. So it's definitely a combination of stress and the malnourishment of food. But there's also like cognitional issues. If you're a pregnant woman and you're also suffering from the stuff that we're talking about, you're not going to be passing like a high zinc load onto your child. Um, and then I mean, I've got a 1-year-old, so I've got much more of a better understanding of this now. I mean, there is getting. So I mean, a lot of people will be probably fearful of feeding the kid 1-year-old steak and stuff, and there's there's an argument to that. So we sort of feed him sort of like boiled organic sort of lamb mince and stuff like that, so which is much softer. So I could see from a child's perspective how getting that red meat in them, they're probably quite deficient, because I think a lot of people have this understandable concept of, there's a sort of a choking issue. I don't want to feed them sort of like meat; it's quite tough or whatever. And then when you sort of like see some of the foods that you can get off the shelf, they're not very rich in sort of in red meat especially. So from a parental perspective, you can kind of see how kids get brought up on a very, very zinc deficient diet straight away, and there's something about eating zinc as a whole food and meat with the amino acids, and all the other aspects, rather than just taking a zinc supplement. It's like night and day. Like, you've got to get that wholeness, for it to actually perforate deeply into cells. I I personally find, like whenever, you know, so from my personal experience, I mean, one of the things, it's a bit of a weird topic to talk about, but one of the things that we try and get men to do, especially, is to reduce their sexual fluid loss, because zinc is such the semen is very, very highly rich in zinc. So what you'll find is that, I speak to women on the program and I tell them, you got this holy trinity of things that you need to focus on, which is diet, lifestyle, and detox. It's like, before you even before you even look at other aspects, those are the main things. If you don't get one of them right, the chance of you moving forward is very slim. But for men, it's like the holy diamond, the holy square. They've got to stop the ejaculation, because they can be doing the detox, the diet, and the lifestyle really well. But if you're constantly releasing high levels of zinc constantly, you can't replenish that. The body's already really deficient in zinc itself, so trying to replace that is really challenging. But the point I was trying to make is, when you're recovering from that zinc loss from sexual fluid, I find, and this is the same with all my clients, is that in order for you to feel better, eating red meat is way quicker than taking a zinc supplement. So it's getting that red meat into the system is the most important. And I just don't think kids are getting much. I mean, I hang around now, obviously, with a lot of parents and stuff. So you see, they're just not eating red meat. It's chicken nuggets and fries and, all that sort of stuff. We're in a pandemic of zinc deficiency.
Yeah, it's cool that you guys touch on that, because I think a lot of camps, I've been researching pretty deep in the health space for like 6, 7 years, trying to, put myself back together. And all you ever really hear about is like magnesium loss. Like, if you're stressed, just take more magnesium, more magnesium. And you get into a little bit more of the HTMA circles, and you're like, well, it's actually calcium, it's magnesium, it's zinc. Like, you're going to lose quite a bit of, minerals just in general from stress. And it's funny. I also talk to a lot of people, like, well, my life's not really that stressful. And it's like, well, if you've been eating a standard American diet for 20, 30 years, you've accumulated a bunch of heavy metals. Some of that have even been there since birth, most likely, because our parents didn't know much, and they were, like you said, I grew up the same way, just fast food and just, pizzas and whatever, so they already accumulated some metals. They gave them to you. You don't really have to necessarily live a super stressful lifestyle in 2023 for your nervous system to just be stressed, basically from the accumulation of the chronic infections, the heavy metals, the parasites, and things of that nature. Am I
Yeah, I
correct?
mean, and now you've got big external issues, like the obvious ones, pollution. The less obvious ones, EMFs. EMF, you know, the EMF in our environment has actually gone up around 10. I don't know the exact number, but it's between 4 and 10 quadrillion times from background EMF frequencies.
It's insane.
Now, yeah, it's crazy. So, especially radio frequency stimulates the body, stimulates the adrenal glands. I mean, you just have to speak to people who say, like, yeah, turn your phone off before you go to bed, you'll sleep better. And that's actually part of our everyday chat. But people don't realize the reason why you sleep better is not necessarily because you're not staring at blue light. Because generally, if you're not watching your phone, not staring into your phone, you're generally watching TV. So you're still getting the blue light, but you generally, people that are not overly sensitive will sleep better. Well, the reason is they're not sat there with EMFs blasting into the face just before bedtime. So that's another factor, is EMFs is a huge contributor to all of this stuff, which sort of like, lends itself to what we're sort of explaining all the way along, is like, um, it's such a holistic process. I mean, what you were saying about Morley Robbins, I don't know the program too in depth, but it's like, oh, to take this, take this, take this, take this. But really, as a practitioner, if what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just ask the person questions and figure out what's actually going on for them. Because there's some people that are really, really sensitive to EMFs, they're not even aware of it. So I know that I need to get them into a safe space before they can even properly heal. Do you know what I mean? So, that's what frustrates me about other people. I'm not saying everyone does it, but it's just like, oh, just do this, take this, take this. Like, actually, in reality, you've really got to get to know a person. Sometimes you can pick up on like abuse as a child, and you've got to help them work through that, which is more of a psychological thing, even though mineral balancing helps. But yeah, I mean, it's such a holistic, like what you was just saying then, just take magnesium. Well, it's not, yeah, we're all pretty deficient in magnesium, but everyone's looking for this one thing: magnesium, lime, copper. That's not how the body works. The body's a multifunctional, we're literally working with probably the most complex organism that we're aware of at this moment in time. You know what I mean? It's like driving around in the, driving around in a Bugatti, driving it at 200 mile an hour for 20 years. You've never cleaned it. You're filling the fuel up with chip fat oil. You've crashed it a few times. You're not even aware that you've crashed it because you're that dazed out. You sat in there, you're drinking, you're smoking. So it's like driving around in a Bugatti for 30 years, absolutely killing it. And then trying to figure out, well, why is the engine not working? And then saying, oh, the engine, the reason why the car's not working is because you need to swap chip fat oil for petrol. Well, yeah, I mean, that's one component, but the engine's messed up, the oil's messed up, the structure of the car is messed up. It's not just about changing the oil or changing the fuel. It's literally about putting that car inside of a garage for a complete overhaul. And that's basically what mineral balancing is all about. It's understanding that it's a really good way of thinking about it, actually, is thinking about it in terms of like a car. And, basically that's what we do. We're just like, we're managing an extremely complex car. But the basics are very similar. If you put the car down, pedal to the metal, well, what you're going to do is similar to being in fast oxidation. You're burning the engine out. So what happens when you burn the engine out? You keep doing it. It's eventually going to burn out, and then you're going to be in the slow lane of the highway because the engine's been burnt out. So usually when the engine, so it's very similar way of looking at it, is looking at it from a holistic perspective. So yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, I love the analogy. So let's get back into this part you said of, so even though someone may be showing hidden copper indicators on an HTMA, we may still give them copper depending on the sodium potassium or NAK ratio, whatever terminology you want to use. Now, is that simply because the more we get, because for the more I try to go through Susan's course, it seems like the most important thing that we're doing is manipulating that ratio. And by manipulating that ratio, we're going to balance out more of the organs, the glands, the detox functions. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong because I'm still learning, but it seems like that's the reason why we would want to give copper, because if we can keep balancing that sodium potassium ratio as close to the ideal ratio as possible over time, then everything else will begin to dump. And, am I onto something there, or am I off?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, when you're looking at hair analysis ratios, you got the main ones really sort of like calcium magnesium ratio and the sodium potassium ratio. The main thing that like affects the calcium magnesium ratio is dietary things. So like sugar and carbohydrates are generally the biggest thing that affects that. And then generally, the sodium potassium ratio, the biggest thing that affects that is sort of like stress, lifestyle. And, Dr. Eck found out early on that the way to balance a low NAK ratio is to boost up the copper, and to deal with a high NAK ratio is to reduce, is to sort of add zinc. Yeah, it's a big focus, but, you know, does that mean if so some people, for example, got a chronically low NAK ratio, and we'll keep giving them limcomin, and it'll stay chronic. They will still detox if they do the enemas and do the saunas. They'll still restart to remove metals and stuff. So what I'm trying to say is it's not like a case of you won't move forwards if you don't get the ratio balanced, But in terms of like severity, I mean, we do call it the life death ratio. We call it the vitality ratio. Sodium and potassium are sort of like, the electrical minerals of the body. So if they're sort of out of balance, inside and outside of the cells, you're going to get sort of EMF issues, emotional issues. Generally people with a low NAK ratio feel stuck. They feel like they're in a hole. They're stuck in the past. So yeah, it's an extremely important ratio to deal with and manage. And to deal with and manage that, it's a mixture of taking the limcomin or the zinc, making sure the diet's, really superior, making sure the body's well rested. But that doesn't mean you're going to not move forwards in other ways if you do have this chronic NAK ratio that's low. So it's really, really important to balance it. But does that mean people aren't going to move forwards until that's balanced? That would be a no, because they'll still move forwards. In many ways, you've got to actually remove a lot of toxins in order for the NAK ratio to balance itself, because the body's just in that much of a state that you actually have to, remove some of the sort of bricks that broke the camel's back, before that ratio can actually like boost itself up properly. So, like I say, it is this conglomerate of things that we're all doing at the same time on a hair analysis, on a mineral balancing program, that we're trying to tick every box all at the same time, really. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so, as someone's balancing out on a program, how long does it usually? I'm sure, obviously, it's everyone's different, but generally, what do you practitioners see as far as the timeline on when people start to dump the excess copper on the test?
Um, I think one thing that is really important to discuss is how old people are. So the younger you are, generally the quicker you will heal. That's just what happens, and it kind of makes sense. Just younger people have just more energy to use up. So, if you're looking at like a kid that's got copper toxicity or copper imbalances, you can give them supplements, and to balance out the NAK ratio, and you really don't have to do that many detox therapies with them, and they'll generally balance out the copper very rapidly, sometimes within months.
Wow.
Then, as you start getting sort of past your teenage years, the biggest problem with teenage years these days is that we hammer our bodies so much. I've got a little brother who's quite a lot younger than me, and he's seen what I've gone through, and he, didn't really follow my advice, started taking drugs, doing vaping, eating. He was well known in our family for someone who never ate any greens. And he's actually come to me recently asking for a hair test because he's obviously feeling some of the stuff that I was feeling when I was his age. So I looked at his hair test, and it was a hair test that you would expect to see from someone his age, 2021, where it was in slow oxidation, it was in sympathetic dominance, but it wasn't in like a severe 4-low pattern or like a 3-low pattern. It was just it moved. It started that stage of burnout, but it was not in full burnout. So someone like him, bearing in mind, when I was his age, I'd taken Accutane, which was a really huge thing to deal with. So if you've not taken any sort of medical drugs that have really messed you up, in your 20s, if you're really diligent with the program, you could be looking at 1 to 2 years before you sort of balance out copper. I'm speaking generally here. And then sort of when you get past your 30s or in your late 20s and you've really been hitting things hard, it could take a little bit longer. But in terms of like that copper dump that we talk about, so we talk about a copper dump whereby all of a sudden on the hair test, the copper levels will go through the roof usually, or it will go much higher. You generally don't need to get a hair test for you to understand when someone's going through a copper dump, because you'll get an email and it's kind of like whatever's going off. I'm not sleeping. I've got horrendous anxiety, so you can generally tell when someone's going through a copper dump. So in order to like see a copper dump, that can be anywhere between like 6 months to like 2.5 years, and that it's difficult to kind of. Generally, the more burnt out a person is, the longer it's going to take. So if you see a pattern like a 4-low pattern, which is like really quite a severe pattern, then people generally take longer to sort of dump the copper. But again, the sort of theme of the whole discussion is even when that person's dumped copper, or even when a large amount of copper's come out, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden their problems are going to disappear. There's a big thing in hair analysis whereby just topping your zinc level back up on its own can take a year just to do that. Complete liver regeneration can take up to 10 years. So although you have, removed some of the major players that are causing the engine to not function properly, so let's, you throw a spanner in the engine, that could be copper. You've pulled that spanner out the engine. Now it's about putting the nuts and bolts back together, which is like, fixing the adrenal glands and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a lot of it's on how diligent people are on the program. That's a big player. But generally, when people do dump copper, they will generally feel better. The biggest problem that you can have is getting people to switch to like a copper protocol fairly quickly, because when the body's dumping copper, all of the things that copper toxicity can produce will generally heighten. So things like sleep disturbances will get 10 times worse. And when your anxiety increases, your mind, if you got a racing mind, that will increase. So if you can imagine, your skin issues might increase, your acne might increase. So if you can imagine, like, if you're experiencing all of that all at the same time, you're not sleeping very well. You've got heightened anxiety. All of these problems that you're trying to deal with, like skin issues or acne, have all of a sudden flared up. So you're freaking out. Most people will kind of freak out when they're going for a copper dump. So it's really important as a practitioner, and that's kind of what happens in the Jason Hommel's group, in my opinion, is they'll take copper and they'll almost go through what we would call a copper dump, but it's just the body trying to get rid of the excess copper. It's not a dump. So the body's like freaking out. Do you know what I mean? And you've really then got to get people to take, things that help bind to copper. Things like inositol, choline. Doing maybe reducing sauna time or reducing the saunas, because the sauna will just push that out even more. Generally the rule is once the body starts a dump, it will finish it to the end. So, you don't have to like keep doing the saunas and stuff. So that was one of the biggest problems that I had when I was dumping copper, is that I just kept on doing the program fully, when really that was not a very wise move. You know, you want to be slowing down the program, probably taking some of the supplements that are a bit stimulatory, and then taking, things like lecithin, you know, things that bind to copper, maybe a little bit of molybdenum, etc. I've got a whole video on what you need to do when you're dumping copper, but it is kind of its own program in a sense. And yeah, that is something that is super, super important for practitioners to jump on extremely quick when people are going through a copper dump. Mm.
Yeah, that was actually my next question is like, it sounds like people can experience so many symptoms all at once. Is there a way to kind of back off or supplement extra things? Yeah, send me the link to that exact video. We'll put that in the show notes for anybody who maybe is on the protocol and might start to experience a copper dump. I'll put a few of your YouTube videos up in there about copper. Um, what about the coffee enema? So I've heard that this can help to reduce like some of the iron or the copper, obviously the metals within the liver. So are coffee enemas a good idea when you are experiencing copper dump?
Yeah, I mean, for anyone that's suffering from like severe copper toxicity, I would probably say that enemas are probably vital to do. A lot of people like sway away from enemas because of like the idea of doing them. But generally, when you've got copper toxicity, most of the copper buildup, or a large part of the copper buildup, is actually in the liver. So actually, like detoxifying the liver, or also like supporting the liver, is in a way a challenge. I mean, in a way, supporting anything inside the body is kind of a challenge. You can't, because it's inside the body, you can't really see it too well. And trying to get to it, I mean, people can take milk thistle, but doing something like the coffee enema, which is sort of like taking in um, coffee in the form of a solution, is extremely powerful at sort of like not only, cleaning out the colon, but stimulating the bile duct in the liver. So that actually basically squirts and sucks out toxins from the liver. It's really, really helps to heal the liver, on a very deep level. So in terms of like using coffee enemas to fix your copper toxicity, in my opinion, is probably the best detox protocol to use. Um, but actually, when you're actually going through a copper elimination process, um, you've kind of got to be a little bit careful doing enemas, and that's for any healing reaction, really, because the enema's going to do one of two things. If the copper that's been dumped, if that's just already come out the liver and it's circulated around the body, doing a coffee enema will help the body detox that excess copper in the blood out of the body. But if the liver or whatever organ or whatever tissue this excess copper's come from, if it's not finished with that dump yet, so it's just released a little bit, because the body's quite intelligent, it's not going to release it all at once, because that's probably dangerous, highly dangerous. So if the body releases a little bit, but there's still more to come, and the person does an enema, you get a problem where it could actually release more of the copper that's waiting to come out in that particular dump. So it's one of them ones that's, it's I on the to be on the safe side. I generally just say to clients, it's probably best for you to like stop doing the enemas for the moment, because there's a 50-50 chance that you're going to either feel better or worse. I mean, sauna therapy is definitely something that people need to reduce. But yeah, I mean, it's really important to have on hand some of the sort of copper binders, like I mentioned, inositol, choline are really big ones. You can find them. You can find them in like sunflower lecithin. So that's a good supplement to keep. 200 milligrams of like molybdenum. 200 micrograms of molybdenum is also useful when you're going for a copper dump. Making sure that you've got some distilled water at hand. So obviously distilled water is, sort of hungry water. So it sort of like will bind to toxins So distilled water is generally really good. Just going out on long walks is generally really good just to keep yourself grounded. Maybe taking extra things to help you sleep, like valerian root, slippery elm, um, that sort of stuff. But basically, what I'm trying to say is we're trying to put a lid on things. Is what the main thing that you need to focus on when you're going through any healing reaction. Um, but I think it is quite important to distinguish between what metal you're releasing and what binders to take. Some stuff are better at binding to copper, some stuff's better at binding to mercury and stuff. So that's something I've actually implemented into my app, is a troubleshooting system whereby it takes you through a series of questions to figure out how well you're doing the program. Because basically, this is one of the things that practitioners have to do in real time when they're trying to figure out whether someone's going for a healing reaction. So the first thing you generally need to do is you need to ask the person how well they've been doing the program. Because if they've been doing the program well, the chance of them going for a healing reaction is way higher. And if they've been going through a really stressed period, or for men they've been, ejaculating a lot, then sometimes the feelings that the client's getting is actually a feeling of them being stressed, being more stressed. So that's the first thing to do, is to figure out how well you're doing the program. So that's what the app does. It figures out how well you're doing the program. And then on the next thing to ask, or on the next part of the app, there's basically like smoking gun symptoms that you generally get when you're going for a healing reaction. This is like any healing reaction. So, really common ones are metallic taste in the mouth. That's probably like number one. You have a metallic taste in your mouth. Have you got a sudden onset of brain fog? Is another one. Has your libido, if you've got any, reduced? So then you can figure out, well, yeah, you've got smoking gun sort of healing reaction symptoms. You're doing the program well. So that's, 1 + 1 is equaling 2 at the moment. And then you can then ask people specific questions about symptoms relating to specific toxins. So if you're going for a copper dump, generally you will get an increased race in mind. You can get like pains in the shoulders is quite common. Headaches are quite common. What else is common? Sort of a flare up of acne is common. Rashes are quite common. Diarrhea is quite common because that copper's killing the candida off, which we was talking about earlier on. So you've got these lists. Sometimes people won't tick any of them. They'll tick, some of the symptoms more related to mercury, which is like a sudden disinterest in work and relationships is a really common mercury symptom. So you can actually ask questions and figure out what toxin a person is likely removing. One of the things that I've actually integrated recently as a practitioner is heavy metal P tests. Because one of the biggest issues that we had as practitioners is that if you think someone's going for a healing reaction, in order to figure that out, sometimes you've got to have a little bit of hair growth, then you've got to cut the hair, send it to the lab. You're talking 2-3 weeks. So having a at-home urine heavy metal test kit can be, in a way, life-saving for some people that are going through this horrendous experience, because you can say to them, look, I think you're detoxing mercury. And the P tests are really actually quite accurate for acute issues like this. So they'll go and do a P test that'll show up, manganese or copper or, lead. The good thing about the app that I've built is that I can get people to run through that app, see what it thinks it's going through, and then get them to do a P test, and it'll, it's highly accurate. I mean, it's like close to 90-100% accurate at the moment. You match them up, and then usually you get a hair test back, and you'll sort of see, the copper or the arsenic or the nickel on the hair test as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't heard anyone say that they're incorporating that because that you're right. It does, if I just had a haircut, it might take a minute. And then sometimes I would imagine you're even going to see some things in the urine that you might not see in the hair because if the, organs of elimination are working correctly, you're kind of trying to get it out in the feces or the urine. Do you have a specific test that you like that you think is, I mean, sounds like whatever you're using is accurate. Can we get that here in the US?
Yeah, it's a company called Ossumex. Ossumex. So it's
How do you spell it?
Osumex. Ossumex. Osumex.
Okay. Is it relatively
Yeah,
inexpensive or what?
they've got a no. It's I think it's quite cheap. I think it's like €12 or $12 or something like that. But when you're going through that experience, $12 is nothing. Um, so yeah, you can get them in America. You can get them in Europe. We actually store them on our Europe store. And yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in all of the P tests out there, but that seems to be the one that's cost effective. It does assess quite a few toxic metals. Not all of them. Don't get me wrong, but the main ones. The mercury, copper, nickel, manganese, etc. Manganese is not technically a toxic metal, but that's another story, another conversation. But yeah, I found it a very, especially with the app, very great tool to help people basically because yeah, I mean when I was going through that copper dump and I was in Thailand and I was having to send my hair to America. I mean that process was horrendous. You really feel sorry for people when they're going through this sort of stuff because it's not a nice feeling, and you feel a little bit. It's very difficult as a practitioner because on one level you sat there thinking you've got to go through this situation. There's no other way of. I mean, unless someone comes up with some way of being able to take excess toxins from the liver straight out the system without it going into the bloodstream and through the eliminatory organs. This is the situation this is the cause that we've been dealt. We've got no other option for people to go through healing reactions. So it's about having like a toolbox available, for when people do actually go through these healing reactions, because it's inevitable that at some point they will.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe I'm gonna incorporate that into my practice once I'm done. I like the being able to just have the urine test right at home, so maybe they can get at least an idea. Having a little bit of data is good. Like that will give someone a little bit of like sigh of relief. Like, okay, I'm moving something around. Specifically, mercury seems to be insanely taught especially if you had like mercury fillings and it's really like in the brain. That was my case. I had a lot of mercury fillings growing up, and um I, my first like maybe like month 4 to 5 something like that on the program, like my mercury shot up, and that was like crazy, brain fog, fatigue, lots of parasites. Like it was crazy, and it feels like the mercury in the brain, the body's almost like it's safer where it's at. Like don't move it. And then when you start to move it around, like you just start to get all these crazy symptoms that.
Well,
And then I see the test. I seen the test, and I was like, cool, the mercury shot up and a few other metals. So I was like a little bit relieved, even though I felt awful. I was like, at least something's moving around. But if I could have had one of those pee strips, those urine strips, that would have been nice to just see right in the moment.
yeah, 100%. I mean, and this is one of the things that the body's really good at, and this is why we analyze tissues, is because if you've got an acute, if you give people a dosage of mercury in the bloodstream, they're going to die. Arsenic. We all know. I mean, mercury is, as far as I'm aware, the number one and number two most toxic substance for human body. So when the body takes in toxins, if it can't eliminate them, it will push them into tissues because it can't be having this toxin floating around the blood because it'll kill it. The body's wise, it's going to kill the body. If the detox pathways are shut down because the energy level's so low, it's going to shunt these toxins into tissues. That's just the wisdom of the body. So when you go and get blood tests and stuff, I'm not saying that blood tests are bad per se. I mean, you can get a lot of stuff from blood tests, But the body, you've probably heard this before by mineral balancing practitioners, but the blood is a buffered system. The body, if there's an acute problem in the blood, the body can die pretty quick. So the body puts all this stuff into tissues. So hair tissue mineral analysis is actually looking at the body from a cellular perspective, from a tissue level perspective, which gives you a much deeper understanding of what's going on at a cellular level. Because really, a cell is if you think about sort of vectors. I mean, a cell's just like a human body on one level. It's got it eliminates things, it takes things in. So if you look at the cells, in reality, what you're doing is you're actually looking at the body as a whole, because the cell is actually the human body is a larger vector of the cell, if that makes sense. So that's why looking at cells is so important, and it gives you an understanding of the bigger picture at large. Because if you think, cells, I mean, I don't know how many cells we've got in the body, trillions really. And they're just little miniature versions, you are basically a conglomerate of how healthy your cells are. So if you can figure out how sick or how healthy your cell is, and figure out ways to actually make that cell healthier, that's just going to manifest in who you are as a human. So this is why the real test is tissue analysis. Unfortunately, when it comes to copper, copper's very hard to test for copper toxicity. The only way to do it would be to get a liver biopsy test, which is obviously impossible. It's very difficult to get your doctor or a hospital to do a liver biopsy test. They'll generally only do it when they think that you suffer from like Wilson's disease or something like that. But it's the same argument that I have with the copper deficient people. One argument I have is if people don't have copper toxicity, why does copper toxicity always show up on a liver biopsy test? So that's basically like, because their argument is, well, hair analysis doesn't really show copper load. It's more of you look at markers. But my argument is twofold. It's one, why does copper toxicity show up on liver biopsy tests if copper toxicity isn't real? And the second one is, if you say copper toxicity isn't real, why does people's copper levels on a hair mineral analysis test, when they're doing a mineral balancing program, shoot up at some point, and they will get the copper toxicity symptoms, and then subsequently, once that copper's been removed and the hair test showing it back at a reasonable level, why do people's symptoms improve after that process happens? So if they want to argue with the hair analysis thing, I mean Jason Hommel has got no clue about hair analysis tests, but his argument is fluoride. And you just go back to the liver biopsy one, which is, well, if you want to argue that away, which is a poor argument, you just go back to the liver biopsy and say, well, why are people, why does high levels of copper show on a liver biopsy test for people that have got copper toxicity symptoms?
Yeah, he'll tell you to take 50 milligrams of copper, and when you puke up your breakfast, it was all the fluoride just rushed to your organs, and you should just take more the next day. Kind of wild.
Well, yeah. I mean, we was talking about it before we come on today, and I was saying to you, the best way that if you've come from if you want to use the scientific process, and you want to come at things from an honest and integral perspective, as a practitioner, you should always go into anything or any conversation realizing the truth. It is the truth that you don't know 100% of everything. No one knows. I mean, scientists don't even know how I've just closed my hand, which is consciousness. They don't got no clue how that works. So you can't think that you know all of the answers. So if which means that you should be able to deal with scrutiny, or at least deal with questions. So one of the issues that I had in the Copper Revolution group was that I went into that group thinking maybe maybe there's something in this group that I'm unaware of. And if you're still there, we've got a little breakup. Are you still there?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I went into that group thinking there's something that I might be unaware of, and as a result, started asking questions, very reasonable questions, without any sort of aggression or anything like that, and found that the response was very poor. So I would obviously then respond back to that, and the responses were very bad to a point where he just banned me, and then we went into a sort of a personal discussion on Messenger, and again he kind of got aggressive. So it's one of the reasons why I ended up making a video on the YouTube channel, which again, I mean, I made the video as an analysis of some of the articles and some of the thought processes in the Copper Revolution group, and I'm quite open for anyone, Jason or anyone, to look at them videos and actually come back with a response. In a way, I would like that to happen, because that gives me a chance to maybe learn something. But I haven't got any response yet, and that's got like a few thousand views on it. So, but yeah, I think the point I'm trying to make is, if you've got same with the Morley Robbins group, I noticed that if you do try and say anything that's against the grain, instead of them coming back with some research or an argument that actually makes sense, you'll just be removed from the group. So that's really a pet peeve of mine. I don't. I've got a couple of Facebook groups to do with hair analysis and stuff, and I make a big effort not to ban people. In fact, as far as I'm aware, I've not actually banned anyone, because we can just have a dialogue, and if you're coming from a place of truth and they're coming from a place of untruth, the dialogue just ends up fizzing away, because the other person eventually just realizes that you're coming back at them with just common sense answers. So even if you end up agreeing to disagreeing, there's no need to be banning people from a group, and that's just not the scientific method anyway. So what I'm trying to say is, if you ever come across someone that's like that, that's very, very heavy with the banning and the blocking and this, that, and the other, which is very ironic in the Copper Revolution group, because all Mr. Hommel talks about is free speech, and then does the opposite of that. So that's a red flag for me. I mean, this is one of the things, I get a lot of questions about Copper Revolution, but what really irks me and frustrates me is, I don't actually want to go any deeper into it and expose it even more, because I'm just wasting my time. I went in there, I sort of saw stuff that I think's just completely inaccurate. I got banned, blocked. I made a video about it, and that's it. You got to move on from it, because you end up spending so much time. It's a little bit like spending time trying to prove to people the Earth isn't flat. Do you know what I mean? You can't sometimes you got to say what you need to say and just move on. I'd much prefer to spend a lot more time, going into things that actually have some weight, some weight to it. So there's a few sort of things in hair analysis. You've got the ARL sort of camp, you've got the trace elements camp. I spend much more time delving into what trace elements do and their sort of processes and methods and stuff, because I actually find that, I'm going to get more use out of delving deep into that side of things, rather than someone who's just talking nonsense on the internet.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you dove into that. I thought your response was very professional and level-headed, and I've even had discussions with Aaron about that. It's like, what are you wasting your time on trying to call out any other camps? Just, just show results. That's all you do. Just stick to what you're good at and what you know, and show results. And I think you guys do that pretty well. And this is another thing, like Jason actually does read a lot of science, and so does Morley. But then the white papers have not been time tested over a bunch of cases. They're just kind of drawn from the white paper, trying to analyze the body and its complexities just from papers and science in a lab or some studies. But the HTMA people, I started to realize, have been doing this for decades. They have probably millions of reports at this point that can just prove it. And it's like, yeah, okay, you have the science and you're making logical sense from that, but have you tried it on millions of reports and seen the results? And that's what kind of grabbed my attention from HTMA.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about hair analysis as well is you can actually see the results. With like the Revolution group, it's more like, oh, just feel into it. However, it's like, well, we're actually using a lab to see exactly what's going off. And reading literature and reading books and reading that, like, it's super super important. But I mean, you've got to be a little bit careful. You know that's people, there's biases. People do scientific reports in order to try and irk out something an answer that they want. There's funding involved. So, I'm not, it's really important to read literature and stuff, and read books and read as much information as possible. But, you've got to be careful about that aspect of things. You've got to also, I mean, with Hommel, like, and I'm not that up about Morley, but he reads a lot of literature, which I find, which is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to knock that, but then doesn't implement a scientific lab to prove that conclusion. That to me makes no sense, because you all you're going off is what you've read, but in order to prove what you've read, you've got to implement some sort of scientific, lab marker or some sort of scientific result in order to match up what you're reading with with direct experience. You can't just go on symptoms, because that's kind of the opposite of the scientific method. That's just anecdotal. You can't read stuff and then say, well, yeah, I'm right because I'm getting all of these anecdotal responses back. Well, no, I mean, one thing about hair analysis is that we do get anecdotal messages from clients, but we can also prove that by looking at the hair test and saying, well, this is the reason why they're feeling like this, because we can actually visibly see it. So that's another conflict that I found initially with that sort of group, is that it makes no sense to me to read all this literature and I have nothing scientific to back it up. No blood work results, no hair analysis results, whatever, urine results, I don't know, whatever you want to show us, show us. But you can't just go off written papers. It has to be combined. It's input output. You know what I mean? Garbage in, garbage out. You will learn it from school.
Yeah, I agree, man. Speaking of the, hair analysis for this last little bit that we got, I want to definitely plug your app, which I can't wait to use as a practitioner. I think it's going to, it's revolutionizing the space. I love the data that I get back from it just from doing my testing through Aaron. It's just super cool. It's professional looking. You look at the graphs side by side from last test to new, which I think is super great because a lot of people want to see those changes, and it makes it easy on the practitioner not to have, pull up the last one, look at the new one, and try to, compare and contrast the results. So why did you decide to build the app, and why should people jump on the app?
Yeah, so I've got an app. It's www.hairanalysis.report. Basically, how it come about 4 years ago when I was working for Dr. Wilson as a hair analysis practitioner. Dr. Wilson wanted us to look at the client's hair test results and then send him an email with all the patterns on there. Now, as you can imagine, I wasn't charging too much at the time, so I was taking up a lot of my time. I knew the patterns, that were just taking time to go through a process of irking them out. So I was like, I'm just going to build an app to do it for me. So I sort of started building it. And after a while, I sort of realized that this is when the vision started to sort of come out. I sort of realized that this is going to be really helpful for practitioners as well. So, one of the things that you'll find when you get into hair analysis, and I mean, we've only just briefly touched on the copper aspect of hair analysis, but there's hundreds and hundreds of hair analysis patterns. There's hundreds of symptoms that you can connect with patterns. There's thousands of variations. So, as a practitioner, in order for you to extract all that information, it's kind of impossible. You can get the main stuff, you're in a follow pattern, you're in this, you're in that. But one of the things I wanted to do is kind of build an algorithm in order to express really the beauty of hair analysis as as efficiently as possible. So the app basically will assess the hair analysis. It will look at symptoms, and it will obviously run through an algorithm. There's thousands of pieces of data now in the algorithm, and it will tell you not only the major patterns, but it'll tell you little nuances like, if you've got a drop in mercury, if you've got a drop in selenium and an increase in mercury. We've got something called it's sort of like the Saturn return, which is, if someone goes into a 4-low pattern and they're kind of around the Saturn return, which is between sort of 27 and 34, generally that's a time when they might be dealing with parental issues and working through that. So it'll pick up on stuff like that. And, the idea is not to replace a practitioner. I really want to stress it's an aid for practitioners to use. So, as a practitioner, you don't really want to be spending half an hour really delving in. I mean, once you've done the course and you're learning about hair analysis, you don't want to be spending so much time figuring out what's going off on a person's hair test. So it's basically there to sort of help the practitioner. But the vision really for the future is like, we're going to get quite deep with it. So although it assesses symptoms at the moment, in the future it will be able to look at people's health questionnaires, look at the diet. Very obvious one is if you've got an elevated calcium-magnesium ratio, that's usually a sign that a person's overeating on carbohydrates and sugars. So it can look at the diet, it can analyze the diet. Are they eating a lot of rice? Are they eating a lot of cake, whatever, bread, and sort of match up. So it'll flag up, you've got a high calcium magnesium ratio, and you're also showing that you're overeating on carbohydrates. We're going to look at medications that people tick, what medications they're taking, and sort of implement that into the algorithm. So, and then, the other thing that was a problem for me was like, how can I actually get hair analysis and mineral balancing out to a lot of people all at once? You can't do that on your own because you've only got a certain amount of time in the day. There's obviously ways of doing it. You could build a practice. You could have a lot of practitioners underneath. But luckily for me, I kind of knew I was a website designer mainly. So I'm sort of getting more and more into the development side, building this application. So I sort of knew how to do what I wanted to do. So that was my way, really, of putting all of this knowledge, just not from myself, but from Dr. Wilson, Dr. Eck, Aaron. I speak to Susan. So all of this knowledge is basically being put into this application, which is getting more and more intelligent over time. And that's my way of sort of giving back to the community, is to, me knowing that there's hundreds of practitioners using the system and all of them have got potentially hundreds of clients. People are unaware of the, maybe not even aware of me, but me knowing that my reports have helped them, towards helping their health out is really, really a powerful thing for me. But another thing that I really wanted to do was that there's a lot of like disconnect in hair analysis. There's a lot of people that don't really understand hair analysis on a deep level, and this is even practitioners. So I wanted to build a system that actually does hair analysis justice, because before this system was out, you find out about hair analysis, you go to a hair analysis practitioner, you might get really bad advice. They might not be really very good at reading the hair test. There's a few courses out there, if I'm being completely honest, which just do not do hair analysis justice whatsoever. So knowing that there's a system out there that is trying to attempt to do hair analysis justice, it's something that, it really fuels that fire in the stomach.
Yeah, no, I'm super glad that you did make the statement that, it's not a substitute for a practitioner because although it makes the practitioner's life a lot easier, the clients get more data, things like that. The healing reactions themselves are can be brutal. Mine have been brutal. They can be a little scary at points depending on how toxic you are, and there's really no replacement for having that consultation or having that person to lean on, to email, to message, to kind of tell you, hey, maybe back off of this, or, it's just a healing reaction, to kind of walk you through it and hold your hand a little bit. Because from my experience, me being really sick, like expressing it, when thought I had Lyme or this or that, I could express that to family members or my wife. And because I looked pretty normal on the outside, I would go to the gym or do yoga, and even though it was really hard and it would kind of make me more tired, people couldn't understand because on the outside I looked pretty good. I looked a lot healthier actually than I used to because I moved to Florida. I get more sunlight. I quit partying and doing drugs. So for them, they're looking at like a skinny, a less bloated version of me, a more tan version of me, and they're thinking like I'm doing great. And so when you don't have anyone around you who understands like the severe symptoms that you're having, the practitioner is the person that you need to lean on. And also this is a very sophisticated protocol that includes lots of sleep, diet, water, air pollution, EMFs. Practitioners can get really deep in this program, and you're paying for that advice. Yeah, you can get results and just throw it through the app, but if you don't have that practitioner who you can lean on for expertise, this can be a protocol where you'll probably give up or to be really tough on you.
Oh yeah, I mean there's about 5, 6, maybe 7 or 8 disclaimers that you will have to get through if you want to run a report through the app and you're not a practitioner. It will say numerous times you should not be doing this with a practitioner. But what I would say is 100% you cannot beat experience. You can't beat someone at the end of the phone. But one of the apps that I've built, and it's getting more and more intelligent, is the troubleshooting app. So as a practitioner, in order for you to figure out what to actually do with a client who's going through a healing reaction, you've got to go through this whole process, which should take half an hour on the phone. It can take 45 minutes, but it's just a process of asking questions. So instead of like spending that time, which practitioners struggle really, you can send the link to the client. They can fill out the questionnaire, which does 2 things. When the client starts filling out the questionnaire, the troubleshooting questionnaire, they will actually figure out their own problem without even speaking to you first. There's numerous times where clients actually said to me, to be honest with you, I think it's X, Y, and Z. But, as a practitioner, you'll get back a report, and you'll see all the questions that need to be asked. Because sometimes when you're on the phone to the client, you forget to ask key questions. So all the questions are there. You can see all of the key, smoking gun healing reaction symptoms and all the symptoms that are related to toxic metal. So you've got a report which does a lot of the work for you. And then when you ring up the client, it's more of a case of, right, well, I've looked at your report. It does look like you're going for a copper reaction. This is what you're going to have to do, rather than spending 15, 30 minutes trying to figure out exactly what's been going off. Or you might see a key component on the section where they're filling out, how well they're in the program that they might have been missing or they might have done, which really can affect the healing reaction. So you could say to them, oh, look, I've noticed, I've noticed that you've been eating X, Y, and Z, or, I've noticed that you've been taking this. Did you notice that these symptoms started occurring when you did start doing this, or when you started eating this? And they're like, oh yeah, it did. It's like, well, I actually think that's the problem rather than a healing reaction. Now, as a practitioner, you wouldn't have even known about this particular food that this person might have been eating without them actually filling out something like this. So it's using the power of technology, which Dr. Eck actually pioneered back in the 80s. I mean, he's probably got an ARL lab report he was onto this sort of stuff. And, you know, really when you're speaking to a client, it is an algorithm. So it's like, if a person's eating this and this is showing up on the hair test and this symptom occurs and, they've been on the program for X amount of time, then the likely, the output is probably this. So that's what the app's all about, really. It's like a sidekick for practitioners, and hopefully over time we're working with Clark at the moment, building out a practitioner client management system. So that system is to serve clients. So you've got a reporting system and a client management system that should be coming out soon. So it's a client management system specifically for hair analysis practitioners, where clients can log in and view the hair tests and view the symptom reports and log files and stuff like that. So yeah, I think we've got a wider vision. We've got the for me, my biggest passion is the software aspect of things and building out this. But then you've got Aaron, who's like the supplement guy, like supplement king. Like he's obsessed with looking at all of these supplement bioavailability and stuff like that. So what one of the best things I think's happened from us removing ourselves from Dr. Wilson is that we've managed to like form a network of people who are all doing different things, but we're all supporting each other. So I've got Susan's course on our app, so people get sent to Susan's course, and obviously people that are on Susan's course will use my app, so that's like a mutual relationship there. And then you've obviously got Aaron with the supplements, where I've been saying, and yourself who's involved with the supplements, where I'm sort of saying, look, I've got a pool of practitioners that would be useful, and we can get that out to people. And then you've got Luke, who's really passionate about building a lab, which would be amazing. So I mean, when the lab's built, then you've got a really high quality piece of software, really high quality supplements, and a lab that there's definitely improvements that we can make to labs. The lab reports being one of them. So yeah, I mean, hopefully it'll just keep expanding, and we'll make more connections with people, and try and get this amazing program out to the world. Because, like I was saying to you, what you've just highlighted is that the biggest problem for people really is the healing reactions. So, one of the reasons why I'm building this app is to help practitioners, send a little questionnaire to a client and get information back much quicker, and give them advice and tips on how they can actually help the client. Because the biggest problem that we get with spreading the mineral balancing message is healing reactions. People just quit. And when you're working with 100, 200, sometimes 300 clients, some practitioners have got on their sheets. I mean, I had 300 clients at one point. I know Clark has that on his sheets. There's no way you can keep a track of everyone. There's no way you can speak to everyone on the phone. You could do a high ticket protocol where you're charging a lot of money and you only work with a small amount of people, but you're kind of doing a bit of a disservice to the rest of the world. So, that's where this piece of software comes in, which is trying to pick up a lot of information. One thing that I'm making at the moment is something where people can update what they've been up to daily or weekly. So practitioners can see a chart of the enemas, the saunas. So you can just look at a page and get a good feeling of what your client's actually been up to for 3 months. Because that's another issue when you're working with people, is you don't actually know what they've been up to for 3 months. You haven't got an hour to spend with them, explaining to them what they've done. And sometimes the clients will forget, what they've done. So having a daily check-in system, or a weekly check-in system like that, that's my passion. So I could go on for hours.
I think that it's really gonna make the program just so much better. The app, I'm super excited to use it. I'm happy to be in. Even though I'm like a newcomer on the scene, the results I've gotten have been unreal, especially after spending 80, 100 grand on my health the past like 5 years, like just trying all this, like $1,000 a month in supplements and everything. So I'm super passionate about it. That's why I keep giving you guys all a platform to speak on different topics. I think that the mineral balancing community needs some more longer form kind of platform to speak about the nuances of it, how to work through it and what to do. But I think what all of you guys are doing is great. So that's why I'm invested in trying to be a part of it. So I'm running short on time here, though. So why don't you tell everybody, the YouTube channel, the Instagram, how to use the app, all the things, and I'll also put it in the show notes.
Cool. So yeah, we've got a YouTube channel with another practitioner called Luke. We recently rebranded. We used to be called Deep Healing Space, but we've recently rebranded to Life Labs HTMA. One of the reasons is because we're sort of building the app. We're on about building a lab, building a supplement line, so we sort of wanted a bit more of a mature branding style and a mature name. So if you do want to check out our YouTube channel, it's Life Labs HTMA, and I've been on there for like 10 years. I've got like 750 videos, something like that. So there's a lot of content on there. It's been really, really helpful, I think, for people that have been doing a mineral balancing program. So that's that. I mean, if you want to get in touch with me, you can kind of email me direct, lewis@lifelabshma.com. In terms of working with clients, I have to admit my time is definitely more towards building the software. But if I feel like it's the right thing for me to do, I will pick up clients here and there. So the app is www.hairanalysis.report. I will say, obviously, it's mainly tailored towards practitioners. But if you have got a hair analysis test and you just feel a little bit uneasy about the information that you've got, then I would recommend running it through the application. I can almost guarantee that you will get a much more superior report. And then from there, you can actually look at potentially, working with, a practitioner that you might feel is more informed about all the intricacies of hair analysis and whatnot. So in terms of like social media, I've got hair analysis app, which I'm post more on, and then we've got Life Labs HTMA, where Luke mainly sort of runs that side of things. So that's about it, really. We have got a membership on lifelabshtma.com, where you can get extra content, and me and Luke do private live videos and stuff. Sounds a bit weird. But yeah, I mean, that's about it. But keep an eye out, because I think what we're doing as a collective is just going to grow and grow and grow. I mean, my vision for things in 5 or 10 years is quite large, I think. So it's jump on board now, and I think you won't regret it when it comes 5 or 10 years down the line.
Yeah, I think so as well, man. Super great. I actually want to have you back on soon, maybe. Aaron said we should all three do maybe a podcast when the new supplements come in. So maybe I'll reach back out to you and we'll all kind of go through why we wanted to update the forms and the formulas, and we'll just have a three-way combo all around it.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Always available.
Cool. All right, brother. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Catch you soon.